Welcome to Music Today. This is Keitaro Harada. The orchestra world is facing a challenge of gathering together on stage to perform for our audience. As we patiently wait for the day that we can all come back together like before, I wanted to create a place where we can gather together online in real time to relax and enjoy music. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me at Music Today. The concept of the show is to bring in an artist each episode and have a conversation with the artist about a performance we will all watch and listen together. The live component is very important because I encourage the viewers to comment and ask questions to the artist. Music Today is a bilingual show. The live shows during your evening will be in English, and the shows that broadcast during your morning time will be in Japanese for the fans in Japan. If you want to improve on your Japanese skills, you're more than welcome to watch the Japanese interviews too. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in our guest for tonight. Since I cannot hear you clap or applaud, please do me a huge favor and comment by using clapping emojis, or you could write clap, clap, clap. Please welcome our special guest, Victoria Bond. Hi, Victoria.
Hey, Kay.
How are you?
Oh, this is so great. I congratulate you on this show and jumping right into the virtual electronic tech bag. This is wonderful. You've been able to really incorporate technology into your art, which is wonderful.
Yeah, you know, for us conductors, we can't really do a concert without an orchestra, and then the social distancing and this whole virus is just, it's not helping at all, right? So
Right.
I wanted to make sure that we have a platform where we can still talk about music in a very different way, and especially with artists that usually the audience can only see them on stage, but this way we can see sort of the personalities and then, you know, their at-home comfortableness of themselves. So thank you for joining me on the show, Victoria.
My pleasure.
Excellent. So Victoria and I have known each other since 2004. 16 years now. I attended a conducting workshop in South Carolina where Victoria was the teacher there. So Victoria is definitely one of my very first, you're probably my second ever teacher in conducting.
My goodness. Well, I'm so
yeah.
glad. And look what happened.
Look what you've done.
I'm so glad.
I conducted a piece called Dreams of Flying, but on a originally string quartet, correct?
Correct. With some wicked meter changes in the last movement, which you accomplished beautifully.
That's such a lie, because I remember just totally I wish I had, I wish I had those videos still with me where you're giving them, you're coaching me. I'm conducting. I'm so nervous. I'm like 18 and conducting, and then the composer's just standing right next to me and saying, this and that. Oh. I have to pull that video up sometime. But since our encounter back in 2004, sorry, we've been good friends. Like
Indeed.
We've stayed in touch, and with the organizations that I've had in the past, I've conducted many of your pieces, and I just really, really treasure this relationship that I have with you, Victoria, because for me, you're such a phenomenon. You are not only a wonderful composer, but you also are a wonderful conductor. So you really understand how to write music that is very comfortable for us to do our job right.
Well, and one of the reasons for that is because I had to conduct my own music. And I tell you, every composer should have that experience, because it would make them notate things in such a way to make it much more idiosyncratic for a conductor. I mean, I know when a piece is a pleasure as a conductor, just as my former life before being a conductor, I was a singer. So I wrote a lot of vocal music, and I know it feels good, and I know it feels good as a conductor. So that's very important to have both sides of the podium.
Most definitely. So before we dive into the music, I just wanted to make sure I recognize some hellos from your friends. Charles West is saying hello to
Great.
both myself and to you, Victoria.
Wonderful.
We also have Thomas Piercy, who is saying hello to both of us. And then Dave Lake from Savannah, the radio host, was very excited that I had programmed your bridges for the 2021 season.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
so he's a very much a champion of new music and eclectic music and music everything, but especially new music. And so I'm glad that Dave is watching the show, and I know he's very excited to hear from you today.
Excellent.
So let's talk about Mrs. President.
Indeed, indeed. A
Tell us.
timely subject, you know. We haven't had one yet, and it doesn't look like we're going to have one in the very near future, although we may end up with a vice president.
We may, yes.
Yeah. This opera was written about a woman who ran for president in 1872. And her name was Victoria, like mine, and her last name was Woodhull. And even though women, of course, did not have the vote at that point in 1872, so she knew that she wasn't going to get elected as president because no women could vote for her. But she had a platform of equality between men and women, which was absolutely unheard of at that time. Women were pretty much property and didn't have the rights that they have today. And she was such a visionary that even though she couldn't get to where she wanted to go, she knew that others would pick up her ideas and carry them forward. And so the very last scene, she spent election night, by the way, in jail. And in the very last scene, she's in jail for sending obscenity through the mail. That's a story maybe we'll touch on. And she, rather than being depressed, she has a vision that there will be people who come after her, who pick up her ideas and carry them forward. And when we performed this in Anchorage, Alaska, there are a lot of women in politics in Anchorage. And we'll talk about that last scene. Maybe I shouldn't jump the gun. Maybe we should talk about it when we get there.
As we go. Yeah, so let's take a little bit of a listen of Act 1. And then we're going to listen to a few excerpts today. So let's just take a listen to this and we'll talk about it in a moment.
Great.
I am yours. Stand beside me. You speak like an angel. Words from God. I've never been so inspired. We must free, we must love, we must free love. I never will betray you. I never will betray you.
So tell us a little bit about this Act 1. What is happening here?
Victoria Woodhull has a nemesis, and that nemesis is Henry Ward Beecher. When we first meet Henry Ward Beecher, and of course these are actual people, when we first meet him, he is giving a sermon and auctioning off the freedom of a young black girl so that he can buy her freedom from her slaveholder. So he's a good guy as when we first meet him. His sister, of course, was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was an abolitionist. He was very much for women's rights, but he had a secret life, which was sleeping with a lot of his female parishioners. And Victoria, this is not an unusual situation. Victoria Woodhull knew about this, and she wanted him to support her platform. And they were really kind of at opposite ends in that respect. And his younger sister had fallen under Victoria Woodhull's spell and saw that there was a way for women to be strong and to be independent and to be different than the kind of women she saw around her. And Henry Ward Beecher was furious at the fact that she was leaving the kind of domesticity that was expected of her. And also that Victoria Woodhull was spreading rumors, and they were more than rumors, about his extracurricular sexual activities. So he comes into her, she had a newspaper, by the way, the first woman to have a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, the first woman to have her own newspaper. And he comes into her newspaper and threatens her. He's so used to bullying people and having women just sort of under his tyrannical nature that he figures this is easy prey. And she doesn't bite. She finds it amusing, and she says, you know, I know what you're doing, and the story's ready to print. And that changes his whole attitude. And he says, listen, you can ruin me. She says, I don't want to ruin you. You are actually somebody who is searching for love. You don't have love in your marriage, and you are a free lover. You're searching for love. So I don't condemn you for your activities. And this is the first time that anyone has given him a green light, and not his secret life is something he's very ashamed of. And she's the first person that says to him, you shouldn't be ashamed. You are simply looking for love, and you don't have love in your own marriage. And so at that moment, it's like the floodgates open up. And the reason that I call this duet predators is because they're both very predatory in many respects. She, because she has a goal and she's not unwilling to do certain things, such as blackmailing Henry Ward Beecher in order to get her goal. He, because he's leading a double life and he's leading a lie. And she says, the only thing that I object to in your behavior is that you're lying. Why don't you just come out of the closet, basically, and say who you are and what you do? And so at the end of Act One, which is where this duet happens, there's a tremendous attraction between the two of them, and they start to undress each other, basically. And there's a young man who has been in love with Victoria before, but she's already gone past him and no longer interested in him. And he comes into the office and sees the two of them. He has a bouquet of white roses for her. And he comes into the office and sees the two of them. And that's the end of Act One. In Act Two, he writes to the New York Times and he says, this is a dangerous woman. She's a threat to society. She needs to be stopped. And so he, together with Beecher, start the ball rolling to dismantle her campaign and to basically, well, they called her Mrs. Satan, which was the original name of the opera. And there's a cartoon in Harper's Weekly of Victoria with black horns and devilish.
Wow.
And underneath it says Mrs. Satan. So, I mean, if we think Hillary Clinton had mud thrown at her, Victoria Woodhull had, you know, about as horrible a moniker as you can imagine, Mrs. Satan. That's what they called her.
Crazy. So I wanted to share to our viewers the quartet scene from Act Two, and you know, one of the beautiful moments of almost any opera, large-scale opera, is the ensemble scenes and the beautiful mixtures of the different voices with the orchestra. So tell me what drama is happening here at the quartet.
Well, one of the things that I love about ensemble in opera, which is so different than ensemble in a spoken play, is that you can have, and in this case, there are 4 different people expressing 4 different ideas simultaneously. And Victoria's husband James Blood, is saying, you know, you don't have to do this. We have a beautiful farm in the country. You can give up these crazy dreams of yours and come and lead a beautiful, quiet life. She is saying, I still am holding on to this dream. You don't understand me. This is who I am. This is where I want to go. Henry Ward Beecher is saying to his sister, I can't believe that you've fallen under the spell of this woman. She's a whore. And his sister is saying, you're crucifying a saint. I've now found out who you really are. So all four of them are in conflict. It's a double duet. So Victoria Woodhull's husband and Victoria are on one side of the stage, and Henry Ward Beecher and his sister are on the other side. But the end of the duet is all "if you love me," not "do you love me" or "you love me," but "if you love me."
Got it. Let's take a listen.
How did I marry a small-minded man? What must I do?
No more, Victoria. Enough, enough. Will you destroy me? My dear, my darling, my
Beautiful.
Thank you. So it ends with a question. If you love me.
The moment that I thought this was very, very you, Victoria. The moment that in the music that goes tira tira yarara, it's that's such a Victoria Bond moment.
We all have our, you know, what I call it is these are some of my favorite things. I've got a bag of those that, you know, going back to earliest compositions, I can recognize certain turns of phrase, certain harmonies, certain rhythmic motives that just seem to be like my leitmotif throughout my life. And I go back to those ideas and they always change. It's like you're circling around and circling higher and higher, but there are certain themes in my musical themes in my life that are my touchstone. So thank you for recognizing.
It's a signature that you just can't hide, right? It's always going to be there. I think it's the case with any, yeah, of course. Well, it's not a bad thing at all. I think it's a great thing because you're recognized by it. And for someone who knows your music pretty well, it's like, oh, that's a Victoria moment.
Well, thank you.
Thank
you.
I did a little quick search, so I was able to find what you were. Oops, no, that's not the one that I wanted to share. I wanted to share. Hold on.
Sure.
The benefit of doing it live is that I think it's this one.
Yes, that's exactly right. She's got these wings and horns on her head, and it says Mrs. Satan. And as you can see, there's a man who's drinking in the background, and so she's the ruination of society. And they wanted to bring her down.
Yeah, clearly. Oh my gosh. So okay, so tell us what happens towards the end. I want to show the very ending of this opera.
Sure. So as I said, she is jailed. I'm not making this up. Lock her up. She got locked up. for sending obscenity through the mail. And what was that obscenity? She wrote an article outlining Henry Ward Beecher's sexual misadventures with his parishioners. And as a result of that, he, who was very powerful, made sure that she was in jail on election night. By the way, the election night was Ulysses S. Grant was running in his second term. And I'm happy to say that, the Democrat won. But at any rate, she's in jail. Her financial empire is in ruins. Her friends have all left her. Henry Ward Beecher has threatened his sister that she is having an unnatural relationship with Victoria Woodhull, and she will never have a future life if she goes on with this. Her husband has left her. And to all intents and purposes, there's this deep, dark hole that she sinks into before she sees that there is a light at the end of this particular tunnel. And I love those moments, that the darkness, the hopelessness that then turns. And she realizes, no, it's not over. Arise, arise from my ashes, arise. And she sees that there will be a future, that women will accomplish that which she has been trying to help them to accomplish her whole lifetime. And I think, I always cry when I think of this moment, because it goes beyond herself. It's one of those moments where she has this vision that is bigger than herself. Yes, she's an ambitious person, but this vision goes beyond that. And when we did it in Alaska, we did it in 2012 with the Anchorage Opera in Alaska. And there were a lot of women politicians, and we had a wonderful director who said at the end, she's just in a tight spot at the very end as she's in jail, but she's envisioning this. And so as she is envisioning it, out of the wings, these women politicians came down to the edge of the stage and walked through the audience. And the people in the audience knew who they were because they were familiar faces on television. And it was one of those goosebump moments, which of course I couldn't get goosebumps because I was conducting it. But when I saw it later, it was so exciting because it was the manifest reality of this dream. And we got a standing ovation. I mean, people went crazy. So it was very thrilling, very thrilling.
Here's the ending of the opera. Bravo! brava, brava,
Thank
brava,
you.
brava.
Valerie Bernhardt was Victoria Woodhull at that production, and she was supposed to do it this past April in New York. We have had a concert performance of it scheduled, but we're going to do it next year, 2021, and she'll be doing the role again. So
I think I saw Scott Ramsey was singing
Scott
the tenor.
Ramsey, yes, from
Yeah.
Chicago Lyric Opera. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
the fabulous Henry Ward Beecher. Have you
Yeah,
worked
his
with
voice.
him?
Yeah, I worked with him several times at Arizona
Oh,
Opera.
okay, great.
Great guy. We
Yeah,
have a few comments in our live stream, and one of the
great.
question was about Hilary Bell.
Ah, yes, Hilary Bell, my wonderful librettist. Thank you so much for bringing this up, because Hilary, she and I worked together crafting the entire opera. At one point, we had different scenes as a storyboard, which we rearranged in different ways to see how the progression of scenes were going to pan out, because we knew individual moments that we wanted to do. I was so fortunate to work with such a brilliant librettist. We were introduced by Marcia Norman, the playwright who wrote Night Mother, won the Pulitzer Prize. And Hilary was a student of hers at Juilliard, and she was independently interested in Victoria Woodhull. So Marcia said, I think you ought to meet and see if you get along. And we hit it off. It was just, it's such an intimate relationship working with a librettist. You have to be able to show all of your weaknesses as well as strengths, and really rely on each other to shape a work. And an opera doesn't happen overnight, so it's a long gestation period. Plus, there were several workshops. Hilary is back in Australia right now, but I'm hoping that her son is going to be going to school in New York, and so I'm hoping that she will be more frequent visitor to New York. It was just thrilling working with her. She's a great writer, great playwright as well, and just was able to take what was basically a very complicated and messy life. I mean, there was no play to draw from. There's just all of these facts, and there was a lot of background material and a lot of characters, and she was able to coalesce everything into one tight package and one very focused through line, which is really important for an opera. I mean, you need to be able to kind of summarize it in one short sentence. It's theater after all, and all of the messy sidelines of a person's life can get distracting. So it was wonderful that she was able to bring all of these threads together in one cohesive through line.
I also want to share, when I was just doing that search to get that photo, some of the other photos that you can find when you Google her name. She's a very powerful woman.
Matthew Brady, that one that you have in the center is a photo by Matthew Brady, the great photographer whose Civil War pictures are so iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah, short hair, very modern looking in many ways. An amazing person. And, isn't it something that she is not known by most people? A very important woman in history, and we should know more about her.
I really believe so. So, Victoria, I'm going to sort of shift gears from this opera and then just to ask you a few questions about composer. Let's talk about you as a composer. The gift of composing is so special, and I was just wondering what your process was of you becoming a composer.
Well, I come from a musical family. My parents, my grandparents, on both sides, everybody was a musician. So it was sort of inevitable that I become a musician. And I heard music, I say prenatally, because my mother was giving concerts before I was born. And I always liked to make things up. I didn't start my formal piano lessons with my mother until I was 8 years old. But I had a piano in my room, and I used to improvise. And even though I didn't know what it was called, it was really composing. And I would make up stories, and I would make up pictures, and I just loved exploring the world of sound. And I said, this is really what I want to be. And my parents said, well, it's all very fine and well that you want to do that, but you have to have a performing instrument. Being a professional musician, they recognized that that was an important component to being a composer. And so first it was the piano, and then it was the voice, and then it was conducting. So I made that transition, but always having a performing instrument together with composing, even though I knew that composing was really the most important part of my life.
How do melodies come to you?
Oh, if I could answer that, I don't know. It's a gift. Let me say this. One can always work on something. I mean, you can just do counterpoint exercises if no ideas have come to you. But when I get an idea, it is a gift. You know, I mean, the word inspiration has been tossed around and sort of made pallid by overuse. But I don't know where ideas come from. But when I'm very quiet, sometimes they almost always happen when I'm doing something else. When I'm taking a walk, that's where I get so many of my ideas, is walking. I'm an avid hiker, and I take walks every day. And that's a very fertile time. I also meditate, and ideas just, they bubble up. But it's not just the melody and just the idea, it's the working out of it, and how do you craft it into something, and where does it go from there? But the ideas themselves, they are gifts.
I'm going to add another element of you being a conductor. And so when we look back at history, most composers were conductors. They had to conduct their piece, like Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, Wagner, name it. They all conducted.
That's right.
Today we have composer conductors like yourself, Esa-Pekka Salonen, John Williams,
and this guy here also.
And Bernstein, of course. Yes. But there, why do you think there are fewer composers who conduct now?
Well, there's a very easy answer for that, and that has to do with time. The conducting career now, you can't take off at summertime, as Mahler did. If you're a busy conductor, you're conducting a summer festival, you're traveling, you're guest conducting, as a conductor, that there are about three possibilities. You're either studying a score, there are four possibilities. You're either studying a score, you're conducting a rehearsal or a concert, or you're traveling from place to place. And that doesn't leave much time for anything else. And this is what I found. What happened was that I studied conducting in order to be able to conduct my own works. And when I went to Juilliard, I wanted to have a double major in composition and conducting, and found out I couldn't. And I was already accepted as in composition. So the next year, I had to drop my composition major, audition for the conducting department, which I got in. And then it was just conducting. And I had so much catching up to do. I mean, the other conductors, there were only 7 conductors in the whole conducting department. And the other conducting students all came from orchestral backgrounds. So they knew the literature infinitely better. I mean, I was a singer, so I knew the vocal repertory and the operatic repertory, but I didn't know the orchestral repertory that well. So it was a lot of years of catching up and standing in front of an orchestra, and what the training is like. You have to learn in public, as it were. And what happened when I graduated from Juilliard, because there were hardly any women conductors at that time. There were only 3, as I mentioned: Sarah Caldwell, Judith Samoji, and Eve Queller. Those were the 3 that were the most visible, professional. I mean, not on a university level. And so when I graduated from Juilliard and I auditioned for both the Pittsburgh and the Cleveland Orchestra, and got both positions, and had to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life. And I picked Pittsburgh because it was an Exxon Arts Endowment position, which was great. That meant I had a subscription concert. I was music director of the youth orchestra. It was guaranteed conducting. Things took off as a conductor. So that the horse and the cart got reversed. And so I spent about 2 decades primarily as a conductor, with very little time to compose. And that's, so I can tell you from firsthand experience why those two professions, even though they are mutually helpful, and I'm so grateful for having a foot in both, but they're also incredibly time consuming, particularly if you're writing an opera, which kind of takes over your life. So that is, I believe, the reason why it's the time element.
If I recall correctly, you're the first female conducting student ever at Juilliard, right?
First to graduate.
First to graduate. Okay.
Yeah. Catherine Comey was there before me, and that's the first time I saw a woman who was older than I, but still, within my generation, as a professional conductor. And she was amazingly talented. She was terrific. She didn't get her degree though, and I got my doctorate degree from Juilliard, so that made me the pioneer in that respect. Also, the first woman to be placed with a major orchestra, which was the Pittsburgh Symphony. So it was a fishbowl. I mean, a lot of people were saying it hasn't been done, it shouldn't be done, and it won't be done. So there were many naysayers, I must say. The climate has changed, and people said
totally changed.
People said to me things they wouldn't dare say today, and I'm keeping a record of this. I have a journal. I have a journal which has.
Oh, I bet
articles.
you do.
Yeah, which has articles in it, a scrapbook with newspaper articles and various things. So it was tough, It was you were not assumed to be good. You had to really prove yourself.
There's I feel like there's a little bit of a parallel common denominator with Mrs. President and her life story and your journey as an artist. Of course, there's just no way for me to say I would never understand the path and how difficult it was to be a female conductor in 30, 40 years ago. But nowadays, right, there's just so many wonderful female conductors, and it's amazing how this has totally changed.
The talent was always there. The opportunities were not there. And a lot of men, I remember a lot of men saying, well, I wouldn't take orders or advice from my wife, and certainly not from my daughter. So, I mean, the idea of leadership, particularly in America, where we've never had a woman president. I mean, there are countries like England where a woman in a leadership position is much more familiar. But in America, it was definitely not so. I mean, there were not women who were heads of corporations. So that idea of leadership was really a very, very male dominated. It still is, but much less so than it was. And there were no women in professional orchestras until, I believe, Dorrit Anthony Dwyer, the flutist, was the first, and I believe that was in the 1950s. So that's not that long ago.
No, it's not. It's just amazing. You really started it. From the start of staff conductors, a female staff conductor in a professional orchestra in the U.S. You're number one. And now when you look at 2020, there are a lot of female conductors. Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, Dallas, Detroit. Many of the majority now in the top tier, majority are female staff conductors, and it's female guest conductors all around the world, from the Metropolitan Opera to the Berlin Philharmonic. It's just amazing.
It's true.
Yeah. Tell us about. Well, I want to ask you two things, Clara, and the time you spent at Schumann's place.
Brahms' house, actually.
I mean Brahms' house, not Schumann. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's okay. Schumann, Clara Schumann, of course, lived in Baden-Baden, and that's why Brahms rented a room there in the summertime so that he could be near her and the family. So I'd had a stipendium, which is like a grant, to live in Brahms' house several different years, and just was fascinated by Clara Schumann. I have a direct connection to her because my mother, as I say, who was a professional pianist, used to give concerts in Baden-Baden, Germany, and she studied with Carl Friedberg, who himself had been a student of Clara Schumann. So there's kind of a direct line there. And her life reminded so much of my mother. My mother was a child prodigy, and she started giving concerts as a teenager and traveled all over the world, and was the stories that she would tell me, not only of the successes, but also of the loneliness of being a young person on the road by herself, and Clara Schumann being really the first woman pianist, professional pianist. Fanny Mendelssohn, of course, was a wonderful pianist, but because of her family position, she was not supposed to go out and get paid for concerts. So she had house concerts and, of course, made wonderful music. But Clara Schumann was out there earning her money as a professional pianist. And her father was her first coach, as well as her first business manager, and wanted to take complete control of her life and was violently against her marrying Robert. So there was that drama of her having to exert her independence from her father in order to marry the man she loved. So being in the place where these people lived, where Clara, where Brahms, it was really inspiring. I mean, it just they are real there. There's a Brahms Platz and a Clara Schumann Platz, and of course, having the Berlin Philharmonic there and the conductor of Clara from the Berlin Philharmonic, it was really a great experience.
I want to make sure our viewers see that they can find more about Victoria's work, Clara, and there's recordings of it at the very bottom of this page. So please do go and check it out. The website is victoriabond.com. Very
Correct.
easy. Tell me about cutting edge concerts that you do.
Cutting edge concerts. When I was music director of the Roanoke Symphony in Virginia for 9 years, and when I came back to New York, even though my husband lived in New York and we had a commuter marriage, most of my professional musical activity was in Virginia at that time, and then a lot of guest conducting. So when I came back to New York, I wanted to reconnect with all my musician friends in the city. And Greenwich House had something that was called the North River series. A friend of mine, a composer, had a musical portrait, and she suggested me as another composer for that. And so I had that, invited all of my friends to perform, to attend, and it was very successful. So Greenwich House, the director of Greenwich House said, how would you like to have a series of your own, and you'd include other composers, but this would be your own series. And so that fell in my lap. It was wonderful. And for the first 4 or 5 years, we were in Greenwich House under the auspices of Greenwich House with a budget, a small budget. And that's how it all started in 1998. And then I decided I needed to move to a larger space, and I wanted to take over the running of the festival myself. So, I mean, this whole business, and you're an expert at this also, this whole business of being an entrepreneur is something that was not taught in school. And so it was kind of a steep learning curve, budgets, fundraising. Now, it's interesting with the fundraising, and you as music director of various orchestras, you know that part of the conductor's job is to help with fundraising by being the musical face of the community. And so even though you don't have to go out and ask for money, you have to be with the president of the board, and you have to be at the receptions after the concerts, and you have to give speeches at the Kiwanis Club. And so all of these fundraising activities were familiar to me, first starting with the Pittsburgh Symphony, actually. Andre Previn didn't like to give any of the speeches or do any of those activities. So he said, you do it. So it was great. I learned. And every orchestra that I've been involved with since that time, it's been a very useful skill. And so that aspect of cutting edge concerts, raising money and being the face of music to my public and getting them to attend concerts, all of that was very familiar. This is a chamber music series, but we have done a fair amount of opera, not only my own, but operas of Ted Whiprud and Robert Sirota. And so, we've done chamber operas and then a lot of chamber music.
Great. That's so wonderful. Victoria, my final question for you tonight is, performing music has become such a routine activity for us for so many years. It's what defines us, as performers. Then all of a sudden, because of this world crisis, performing in public has become extremely difficult. How has your attitude towards music and performing for an audience changed?
Well, I tell you, as a composer, my life has not changed that much at all. In that I get up in the morning and I write. And by the way, this is one of the differences of being a conductor and being a composer. As a conductor, I got up in the morning and I studied a score. And if I wasn't studying a score, I felt like I was playing hooky. But now, because I'm a composer-conductor, I get up in the morning and I write. And, being a composer is a very solitary activity. I was supposed to be involved with the Conductors Institute in June. I was supposed to be involved with the Seal Bay Music Festival in Maine, where a new piece of mine was going to be premiered. There were all kinds of activities that were planned for this summer that, of course, have been canceled, or many of them postponed till 2021, as Cutting Edge Concerts is now what we were going to do in 2020 is now going to be in 2021. I'm doing a lot of activity for the Metropolitan Opera, and I just got an email this morning from the head of the Metropolitan Opera Guild saying that since the season will be postponed or canceled until December 31st, they're going to be doing a lot of podcasts and HD broadcasts. So, we have to reinvent ourselves, and you're a perfect example. I mean, look at what you're doing. You do have a public. You are communicating with people. You're not sitting back and bemoaning the present situation, which, of course, we can't do anything about. What we can do is we can react positively to it, and that's what you're doing, and I hope I'm doing the same.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, Victoria, it's always a pleasure, and just it warms my heart every time I get to spend time with you and to talk about music, but not just about music, but about life. And you've been such a life mentor to me, so thank you so much for your time to share with our audience today. And thank you very much for all the viewers that have been watching today. This video will be archived, so anyone can watch it later on. Please do share. And Victoria, thank you. And please be safe.
Thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share this video. ありがとうございました。チャンネル登録、いいね、そしてこのビデオをぜひシェアしてください。